joining us on the telecast when we talk about Trump's inauguration and return to the office. And do you think immediate action will be taken on immigrants, and will he be reviving his build to the wall and remain in Mexico policies?
Yes, I definitely remain in Mexico. That's already been stated. And he's talked about building the wall. Building the wall in the first administration ended up to be something that wasn't really completed in any meaningful way. I do think some of these Trump priorities are going to have to measure against other Trump priorities. So one is cost cutting and cutting out waste in the federal government. If you're in a mood to eliminate, $1 or $2 trillion, $2 trillion being the entire economy of Italy, I believe, from the federal budget, you have a lot of cutting to do. So is that the time to try and expand expensive new administration initiatives? I really don't know, because keep in mind, things like deportation, they're going to be expensive. To manage. They require a lot of personnel, they require a lot of infrastructure. So a lot of this remains to be seen. What is really going to happen? My own guess is things will start happening on a smaller scale than have been advertised, but that's just a guess.
All right. And how do you think Trump's proposed tariffs on Canada and Mexico and EU and China are going to impact the US economy and the world?
Well, if they were implemented as advertised during the campaign, they would have a very great impact, because he talked about 20% tariffs on, I believe, Canada and Mexico, and more, up to 40% on China, for example. So all that would have a very large effect on the economy, because a lot of things that get imported, they're not just luxury consumer goods. Some of them are lower cost consumer goods that maybe lower income people rely on. So the result there can be very inflationary. And a lot of them also are inputs into industry. And so if you look at something like the pharmaceutical industry, for example, gets a lot of APIs, the ingredients needed for pharmaceuticals, from China. So if it were implemented as it was advertised during the campaign, it could be exceedingly inflationary. And of course, there's the other effect of antagonizing trading partners and perhaps facing reciprocal retaliatory tariffs, as happened between India and China. India and the United States during the first Trump administration. So all that can be very inflationary and create a lot of tensions. I say if, because my personal belief is there will be a selective implementation of tariff increases. In fact, there were already things floated from the incoming administration to the press that they would focus on strategic industries, for example, rather than just across-the-board tariff increases, as were discussed during the campaign. So I think we're going to see a lot of that. And some of them will be, I believe, threatened to be implemented pending talks with the other side, which we also saw during the first administration, when China, President Trump and President Xi agreed that China would purchase more goods from America. So we may see more of that. I personally am skeptical that we'll see across the board huge tariff increases straight out the door.
All right. When Trump, we have seen that he's spoken about declassifying documents related to the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and previous efforts in this directions have remained futile. And will this order ever see the light of the day, and will it end all conspiracy theories?
Well, I really don't know whether or not these documents will be declassified. I can guarantee you they will not put all conspiracy theories to rest, because conspiracy theories seem to be built into the DNA of the American public. So, but I really don't know whether these documents will be declassified or not.
All right. And when it comes to Trump's decision to postpone the ban on TikTok impact Americans and China, how do you think that will impact it?
Well, there are millions and millions of TikTok users, primarily young people in the United States. So I'm sure they'll be very happy about any delay, although many of them are migrating onto other apps, including from China, as we speak. I believe that the CEO of TikTok was also invited to the inauguration, although I'm not sure whether he made it into the Capitol now that it's a much smaller event. I think mostly this is one means of a dialogue with President Xi. So it's a way to ensure that the leaders will talk early on in the administration, which is something I have no doubt they would have done anyway. So it will have an impact on users of TikTok, but what the geostrategic implications of it are, I don't think it'll be very great given the other priorities that the administration has on its plate, according to the administration.
How feasible it will be for Trump to gain control of Greenland and Panama Canal, and what is his logic behind such actions?
I think the logic of talking about it, in addition to normal shock and awe, which is a favorite tactic of the president, there is some logic behind it, which is to maintain supply chain resilience in this country. So the fact that the Panama Canal still sees a lot of our trade shipping. And Greenland is actually very sparsely populated, but hosts to a whole lot of critical minerals, and has also been subject, although this isn't really reported on very much, both China and Russia have both expressed interest in closer ties to Greenland as well. So I think that's behind the assertions. I think the way they're asserting that we would take them over is extremely unlikely to happen. But I think there is a logic to it, and the goal, my guess is, I'm not advising the president, I'm not in his inner circle of advisors, but my guess would be it would be again to start a negotiation going, which is sort of starting to happen, at least with Greenland.
Do you think will Trump be able to end the Ukraine-Russia conflict now that he is in power?
I think he will certainly try. His own envoy has been a little more subdued about the results. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, although apparently there are already plans to have President Trump speak with President Putin, which again would not be at all unusual for an incoming administration to reach out to other major world leaders very early on. So I think there will be that desire to settle the conflict. I think even Ukraine would welcome it because Ukraine is on a trajectory that's not very positive right now after all this time in the conflict. I think the real fear for Ukraine and for supporters of Ukraine is what kind of a settlement are we talking about? And that's what we have to see. But I definitely do think this is going to be a priority of the president because it was a campaign pledge and a way for him to project his influence and to say that he does what he says he's going to do.
Katherine, my last question to you is, how do you anticipate India-US relations under Trump 2.0 and that with BRICS after his threats of add-on tariffs?
Well, I believe that if you look at what was life like at the end of Trump 1.0, a lot has changed. There's no more COVID in the world. There have been new wars that you brought up, Russia and Ukraine, but also in the Mideast. So a lot of the dynamics have changed, but a certain underlying fundamentals have not changed that affect the U.S.-India relationship, notably China and the threat that China poses to the region. As I say, there were plans, I don't know if they've been actually carried off today, but there were plans for the foreign ministers of the Quad countries to meet on the very first day of the administration, which shows the importance that India plays in our view of Indo-Pacific security. So all that's the same. But I think there's also a lot of desire to tap the potential of U.S.-India cooperation. Prime Minister Modi and President Trump actually talked already after the election some time ago. And the readout was that they talked about the need for continued cooperation on things like defense, but also on technology and advanced technologies, which is something the Biden administration had also stressed. Jake Sullivan, the outgoing national security advisor under President Biden, his last trip to India was just in early January, again, showing the importance that the United States, in a bipartisan way, places on the relationship with India. And all that continues to be underpinned by a very strong U.S.-India people-to-people relationship, which in turn is underpinned by very large, up to 5 million or more, very well educated, very wealthy group, which is NRIs in the United States. So all that remains the same. I do think there will be friction points over these next 4 years in our relationship, as there always are. If I were to bet, I would say tariffs are a major one, because India has about a $33 billion trade surplus with the United States, and because last administration, that was a bone of contention as well. I believe Iran may become more of a bone of contention because the decision of India, for example, to admit Iran into the BRICS, which the United States, to be frank, doesn't take very seriously as a competing organization, but still there will be more pressure, I think, to weaken those ties with Iran. And lastly, and maybe the most difficult one, because it's rooted in domestic policies and priorities and not international ones, is immigration. And there's the H-1B issue, the temporary worker issue, where the majority of recipients of H-1Bs are Indians. It's part of the origin story of a lot of Indian Americans who came here on H-1Bs. And then there's also the undocumented Indians, of which there are at least 7.25 lakh, I believe, in the United States right now. And if there are mass deportations, that could create a lot of political strain on the prime minister and in the relationship. But overall, I would say there's been a great effort over the past decades to broaden and deepen the U.S.-India relationship. And the broader and deeper it is, the less likely that even serious disputes are going to derail it. And that's what I'm expecting for us this time around.
All right, Katherine Hadda, thank you so much for joining us on the telecast and sharing those insights with us. Moving on, before we get into that,